In good weather or bad, we expect to travel where we want and when, but nature is not always so accommodating. We probably understand less about the weather than any other part of our environment. This invisible and mysterious force is the lifeblood of flight. It can also be the death of an aircraft. On January the 13th, 1982, Washington had its worst snowstorm for decades. Government came to a halt. The city closed down. Office workers were sent home early. Not until mid-afternoon were there signs of life at Washington National Airport. It had been closed all morning, to the frustration of thousands trying to escape to warmer climes. Now, passengers for Air Florida's flight Palm 90 to Miami were told to board. They were to be in the hands of a crew with little experience of bad weather.
I remember before we finally got on the airplane that I looked out there and I didn't see any evidence that the pilots had done a ground check of the airplane, which I could tell because there was no footprints walking around the airplane in the snow, and it never, the snow still looked undisturbed. So that bothered me a little bit. I specifically remember thinking, I want to see somebody walk around that airplane before I got on it. I never did see anybody walk around the airplane. Those guys were sitting fat, dumb, and happy in their cockpit and talking about the weather in Florida, as I recall, when I got on the airplane. The captain announced, after we had tried a couple times to back out using the tractor, he announced that the tractor was incapable of pulling us out by itself, but I do recall that he used some reverse thrust to try to back us out. In the snow and ice, I thought that was pretty abnormal. And as it turned out, it was, because it had the effect of sucking up the storm debris into the engines, and I think that, I know now from reading the accident reports, that was a contributing cause to what happened to us. I didn't think we'd actually get airborne, but I could feel us lift off the runway. The shaker was going, I could hear the dishes coming out of the galley all over everywhere, and I knew we were in deep shit. When we hit the bridge, it was kind of like being rear-ended on a freeway, and I said, Jesus, I survived that. And then I realized I was still heavily in motion, and the next thing I know, and we were tumbling, it seemed like, and then we hit something that seemed like 100 times harder than that first hit, which had to be hitting the river. And I blacked out, and as I was blacking out, I just figured that was it, so my last thought was, God help me.
Oh my fucking God.
The plane had hit the 14th Street Bridge over the River Potomac, the main route into Washington from the suburbs of Virginia. Several cars had been crushed by the plane's undercarriage.
The dark in that airplane, it was absolutely pitch black. I remember it settling onto the ground or onto the bottom of the river before I could get my legs free. And I remember swimming out over the top of the seats toward the back of the airplane. I knew I was out of the airplane when the light in the water turned from absolute black to sort of gray. And the contrast between having been in a nice hot airplane about 1 minute earlier, or maybe 5 minutes earlier, whatever it was, and where I suddenly found myself was just phenomenal. I mean, the airplane was gone. Everything was gone. Maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes went by, something like that. And a bunch of rescue vehicles showed up on the Virginia side of the river. And I remember saying something, hey, everything's cool. They're here, And must have been half a dozen vehicles or so pulled up and sat, parked right beside the river there, and everybody jumped up, and there were another 500 people standing out there looking at us, and they just kept standing there and looking at us with their lights going and their sirens going and all that, and eventually I realized they had no way to get to us. And there were 10,000 people probably standing up on that bridge, or it seemed like 10,000. And they were all looking at us, and the irony began to set in on me that, I'd survived an airplane crash and I was going to freeze to death.
I had just gotten there, and it was about 3 deep at the bar, and I'd ordered a drink, and I don't think I ever got it. And someone said there was something on television. They had a couple TVs in there that an airplane had crashed into the Potomac. And the first vision I had was a Cessna 172 or something like that had crashed in the Potomac. Didn't make much of it. And then there was a phone at the end of the bar, and there was a guy yelling. There were 4 lines lit up, and he was yelling for some people I knew. He was hollering across this crowd, and all the pagers started going off. And then we looked up, and we saw it, and someone got on the phone, and they said that a 737 had crashed in the Potomac. And so needless to say, we didn't have another drink.
"75 people died aboard Air Florida's Palm 90 that day in the heart of Washington, less than a mile from the White House. Despite all the people and all the technology, only 5 passengers could be saved from the freezing river. Flight attendant Kelly Duncan. Joe Stiley's secretary, Nikki. She would be rescued later by a Park Service helicopter. Joe Stiley and Priscilla Tirado, who had left her baby and her husband behind in the plane. Priscilla Tirado is temporarily blinded by the spilled kerosene in the river. A passerby, Lenny Skuknik, can watch no more. He dives in and saves Priscilla Tirado's life.
Yeah, everybody get behind the fire truck. Get behind the fire truck, all right? Get across there. Get across there. Run across the bridge on the opposite side.
Investigators of the National Transportation Safety Board, America's air crash detectives, now focused their attention on the wreckage. If anything, it served only to deepen the mystery. There seemed to be no mechanical problems, so why had the plane pitched into the river? True, weather conditions had been bad, but other aircraft had been taking off normally. Why not Palm 90? It was the eventual discovery of the cockpit voice recorder that was to provide the answer. The last seconds of this 30-minute audio tape echoed the desperation of the pilots as they realized they were not going to make it. Mike McDermott is an independent air accident investigator, a specialist in CVRs, cockpit voice recordings.
The CVR indicates the general attitude of the crew as being one of disguised concern. There's a lot of joking around, you hear a lot of laughing, but the joking seems to be as a way of coping with the difficulty of the situation. Their nervousness in flying in snow may be due to their lack of experience. There are instances where they indicate the fact that the de-icing doesn't quite help them.
This is when it's bad here on trying to de-ice things. That gives you a false feeling of security. That's all it is.
They also indicate, and when they're going through their checklist and they're planning for the actual takeoff, they're talking about what they will do, how they will take off. They will apply power. They'll let the nose wheel come off the ground, fly to 500 feet, reduce the power. And their last comment is to reduce it to a certain level depending on their level of comfort, or as they say, how scared we are.
I'll put it back about 1.55, close to that 160. Still how scared we are.
So I think they were very nervous about the situation. They knew that they were heavy. They had a lot of passengers and a lot of weight on board, and the snow only added to their weight, and that caused them some concern.
But why had the plane failed to take off? By analyzing the engine noise heard on the tape, investigators discovered that the pilot had never applied full power, even when the plane was about to drop out of the sky. Unbelievable as it might seem, when the crew were running through their pre-flight checklist, for some reason they had neglected to switch on the anti-icing equipment.
And that became a very, very controversial issue when we listened to the cockpit voice recorder, and they went through the checklist and they said engine anti-ice, and they said off, but nobody wanted to believe that they said off. Why would they say off? And there was so much disagreement later on as the investigation progressed that the tape was again reviewed, I think, by the FBI lab and voice analysis, and some people insisted, no, it can't be off, it's got to be on.
Did he say on or off? Was the anti-icing switched on or not? Today's sophisticated sound equipment can clear up the mystery once and for all. McDermott simply extracts the co-pilot's response from the previous item in the checklist, the word on. Alongside it he places the suspect word, which he calls onf.
And after you've listened to this for hours, literally hours on end, I think it becomes very apparent that the second word is actually off.
The definitive judgment was that the word was off. In the freezing cold, the crew had apparently forgotten to switch on the plane's anti-icing equipment, an incredible blunder. And when the captain made his unorthodox attempt to get the plane off the ramp by using reverse thrust, he had choked the engines with ice and snow. The probes that tell the pilots their engine power had frozen, giving the crew false readings, and they mistakenly believed they were taking off at full power.
The co-pilot apparently understood what was happening, and he desperately tried to tell the captain until the very last minute that it doesn't look right, and the captain simply didn't respond to it.
Now you hear that whine, that's the application of power. You hear them talking about their engine instruments, say this is cold, this is real cold. It doesn't seem right. No, that's not right. It's the same guy. He says, no, I don't think that's right. He's really concerned about this and it's not performing right. He sort of resigns himself to it and says, yeah, well, maybe it is. Okay, at this point, they've lifted the nose off the ground and they're flying. You hear the stick shaker, the da-da-da-da-da-da sound, indicating that they're not flying fast enough. They're about to stall the wing of the aircraft. And the pilot is saying, forward, forward, we only need 500 feet. That was the sound of the impact.
The Air Florida investigation was a milestone in the use of cockpit voice recordings to solve an accident. It also underlined a message as old as flying itself.
I frankly don't know how much more you can tell people. that you have to have a clean airplane. You can't have ice on it. I know the operations are complex, traffic situations, airport traffic, clearances, weather conditions that delay airplanes. I mean, those are all facts of life. These things happen. But at the bottom line is, when you got ice on the airplane, you're probably going to die.
That message was to be brought home again dramatically 12 years later.